The escalator on the second floor of Bridgefield Galleria starts every night at 11:40 p.m. I know this because I can feel it, not hear it, feel it. Somewhere between my fourth and fifth rib on the left side, a mechanical hum kicks in and runs for exactly 6 minutes. Then it stops. Then my apartment is quiet again, and I'm sitting in the dark, wondering if I imagined it. I didn't imagine it. I haven't been inside the Galleria in 14 months. My doctor ran an MRI after I described the sensation. Clean. No abnormality. He suggested anxiety. I let him believe that. I didn't tell him about the smell, that during those 6 minutes, my apartment fills with something that shouldn't be there. Cold tile cleaner. Old cinnamon from a pretzel counter that hasn't served anyone in years. And underneath those faint, almost sweet the smell of paper that's been sitting in a sealed room, the kind of room that was locked for a reason. Bridgefield Galleria closed to the public a long time ago. Officially, there's nothing there. No stores, no staff, no operating hours. But the building doesn't know that, or it doesn't care, because when I worked there as an overnight facilities monitor, everything inside ran on a schedule that no one had set. Escalators cycled at fixed times. Hallway lights moved section by section like something was walking through the building. The food court speakers played a curated playlist at 2 a.m., same songs, same order, same volume, every single night. For no one, or maybe not for no one, maybe for whatever was keeping the schedule. On my first shift, there was a notebook waiting at the front desk. Black cover, soft leather, with a small silver triangle pressed into the center. Inside were handwritten rules, not safety protocols, not building codes, rules for behavior, how to walk, where to look, what to do if a specific door was open that shouldn't have been, what to never, ever do after 3 a.m. on the second floor. I followed those rules for months. I followed them carefully. And then one morning, when I opened the notebook before my shift, 2 of the rules had changed. The ink was different. The handwriting was different. And one of the new rules directly contradicted a rule I'd been following since my first week. I don't work there anymore. I took the notebook when I left. I thought that would be the end of it. Last week, I found a new page. Not a page I hadn't noticed before, a page that wasn't there. Fresh ink, neat handwriting, a rule I've never seen, written for a location I've never heard of, except the rule mentions me by name. I'm recording this now, not because I want to, but because I think the notebook is finishing something it started a long time ago, and I don't know how much longer I get to be the one telling this story. It all started the way most quiet disasters do, with money, or more specifically, with not having enough of it. My name is Cole Duchesne. I'm 34. I was born in Houma, Louisiana, but I'd been living in Beaumont, Texas for about 6 years when all of this happened. I'd come there for a job with a commercial HVAC company, a decent gig I'd held for almost 5 years before the company lost a string of contracts and started cutting people. I wasn't the first one let go, and I wasn't the last, but I was the one who just co-signed a truck loan 3 months before the layoff. So the math got bad fast. I was pulling unemployment checks that covered roughly half my rent. I'd been applying everywhere, warehouse positions, plant work, anything that didn't require a degree I'd never finished. Nothing was landing. My savings account had a number in it that made my hands go numb every time I checked. I was 2 missed payments away from losing the truck, and 1 month away from a conversation with my landlord I didn't want to have. That's when I saw the listing. It was on one of those regional job boards that aggregates postings from small companies and municipal contracts. The listing was simple, almost oddly simple. Bridgefield Galleria, overnight facilities, monitor location Bridgefield, Texas, approximately 40 minutes east of Beaumont. Shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., Sunday through Thursday. Compensation, $21.50 per hour. Requirements: valid ID, steel-toe boots, ability to walk for extended periods, no prior security experience necessary. This is not a security position. That last line should have been strange to me, but at $21.50 an hour for overnight work, with no experience requirement, I wasn't in a position to ask philosophical questions about job descriptions. I applied the same afternoon. I got a call back within 2 hours. The woman on the phone identified herself only as Mrs. Rivette. She sounded older, formal, and economical with her words. She confirmed my availability, asked whether I had reliable transportation, and told me to bring a pen. Your own pen, not one you've borrowed. To my first shift, she said orientation would happen on-site and would be conducted by the outgoing monitor, who had one remaining shift before his departure. She didn't say he was quitting. She said departure. I remember because the word felt heavier than the sentence needed. I drove out to Bridgefield the following Sunday evening. The town was small in the way that southeast Texas towns near the coast tend to be a cluster of older homes, a feed store, 2 churches, a shuttered Dairy Queen, and a water tower that leaned about 2 degrees off vertical. The Galleria sat at the far eastern edge of town, past a 4-way stop and down a road that had once been widened for traffic that no longer came. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a dead strip mall, maybe a hollowed-out anchor store with plywood over the windows. What I found was something different. Bridgefield Galleria looked maintained. The parking lot was clean, not freshly swept, but not crumbling either. The exterior signage was intact. The large glass entrance doors were unbroken. The landscaping, such as it was, had been trimmed recently enough that it didn't look abandoned. If I hadn't known the mall was closed, I might have assumed it was simply past business hours and everything would reopen in the morning. But Bridgefield Galleria had been closed for 11 years. I'd looked it up after the phone call. The mall opened in 1987, peaked around 1996 with roughly 40 storefronts and a J.C. Penney anchor, and then slowly bled tenants through the early 2000s. The last store, a shoe repair place called Heller & Heller, closed in 2013. The property had changed hands twice since then. The current owner was listed as a holding company called Lateral Reserve Group, which had a P.O. box in Galveston and no website. I parked near the main entrance at 9:42 p.m. There was one other vehicle in the lot, a tan Chevy S10 with a chipped windshield, parked close to the doors. I assumed it belonged to the outgoing monitor. I was right. His name was Dale. He met me at the entrance with a ring of keys and a face that looked like it hadn't slept in a way that mattered for a long time. Not exhausted in the normal sense, more like someone who had been resting without ever actually being off duty. He was maybe 50, thin, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and a flannel shirt that had been washed so many times the plaid was almost gone. He shook my hand. His grip was firm but brief, like he wanted to get the contact over with. "You're cool," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." "Good. Come on, I only want to walk through this once." He unlocked the main entrance with a brass key. Not a modern key card, not an electronic fob. A physical brass key with a red tag tied to it, and we stepped inside. The first thing that hit me was the temperature. It was September in southeast Texas, which meant it was still in the 90s outside, even at night. But inside the Galleria, the air was cool, not cold, just precisely, deliberately cool, the way a building feels when its climate system is running on a setting that someone selected with intention. That didn't make sense for a mall that had been closed for over a decade. The second thing was the lights. Not all of them, but enough. The main corridor had its overhead fluorescents off, but the smaller accent lights, the ones recessed into the ceiling above where the storefronts used to display merchandise, were on. They cast a low, warm, amber glow across the tiled walkway. It looked like a mall at closing time, not a mall that had been closed since Obama's first term. And the third thing, the one that made me stop walking for a moment, was the sound. Music, faint, tinny, barely there but playing. A soft instrumental version of something I almost recognized, piped through ceiling speakers that should have been disconnected years ago. It was the kind of sound you'd normally never notice in a functioning mall, but in an empty one, at 9:50 at night, it was the loudest silence I'd ever heard broken. "Is that supposed to be on?" I asked. Dale didn't turn around. "Yes and no," he said. "You'll understand that answer by Wednesday." He walked me through the main corridor. The mall was arranged in a long central hall, with two shorter wings branching off near the middle, one to the north, one to the south. The J.C. Penney anchor occupied the far east end, its entrance sealed with a rolling security gate that was pulled down, but not locked. Some of the storefronts still had their signage. A few still had partial window displays, a headless mannequin in what used to be a clothing boutique, a rotating stand with empty hooks in what had been a jewelry kiosk. Most were simply dark, empty rectangles behind glass. Dale led me to the facilities monitoring station, which was not a room, but a built-in counter near the center of the main corridor, across from a dry fountain. It had once been a mall information kiosk. Now it had been converted into a small workstation, a desk surface, a swivel chair, a corded landline telephone, digital clock, a logbook, and a metal lockbox bolted to the underside of the counter. On the desk, to the left of the logbook, sat a black notebook with a silver triangle embossed on its cover. I noticed it immediately. It was the only object on the desk that looked like it didn't belong to the mall's original infrastructure. Everything else, the phone, the clock, the logbook, could have been placed there by a property management company. The notebook looked personal. It looked carried. "Sit down," Dale said. I sat. He remained standing, positioned slightly behind me and to my right, as though he wanted to be able to see the corridor and me at the same time. "The logbook is yours to fill out," he said. "You'll make entries every hour. Time, section, what you observed. Keep them short. If you didn't observe anything, write, 'No activity observed.' Don't write, 'Nothing happened.' Those are not the same sentence." I waited for him to explain why. He didn't. "The rules for the shift are in the logbook's front cover. There's a laminated card. Read it once now, and then read it again at the start of every shift. Don't skip that second reading." I opened the logbook. Taped to the inside of the front cover was a laminated card, about the size of a standard index card, printed in small, clean black type. The card read, "Bridgefield Galleria, overnight facilities, monitoring protocol 1. Your shift begins at 10 p.m. and ends at 6 a.m. Do not enter the building before 9:45 p.m. Do not remain in the building after 6:15. Zahem. 2. Walk each wing once per hour. Begin with the north wing. End with the south wing. Do not reverse the order. 3. If a storefront light is on when it was previously off, note the store name and time in the logbook. Do not turn the light off yourself. 4. The fountain will not run. If you hear water, leave the main corridor and wait in the east anchor vestibule until the sound stops. 5. The telephone will ring between 11:30 p.m. and midnight. Answer it on the third ring, not before, not after. If you miss the third ring, do not answer at all. 6. The escalator near the south wing has been mechanically disabled since 2016. It will start on its own between 11:30 p.m. and 12:10 a.m. This is expected. Do not approach the escalator while it is running. 7. If you see a person inside the mall who did not enter through the main door, do not speak to them. Log their location, their approximate height, and the direction they were facing. Do not log their face. 8. The black notebook is not part of your assigned equipment. Do not open it during your first shift. Sir, I read the card twice, as instructed. Then I looked up at Dale. "What happens if the fountain runs and I don't hear it in time?" I asked. He was already putting on a jacket which struck me as odd given the temperature. "You'll hear it," he said. "The building makes sure you hear it." He handed me the key ring. 3 keys, the brass one with the red tag for the main entrance, a silver one for the metal lockbox, and a smaller black one with no tag and no visible label. "What's the black key for?" I asked. "You won't need it unless you do," he said. "If you need it, you'll know." That's the kind of answer that would normally irritate me, but the way Dale said it didn't feel evasive. It felt tired, like he'd given the real answer too many times, and this version was all he had left. He walked to the entrance. I followed him with my eyes from the kiosk. At the door, he paused and turned back. "One more thing," he said. "The laminated card is the official list, but a building adds things. You'll find new instructions in the logbook margins, on receipts inside the lockbox, sometimes just written on the counter when you look away. Don't ignore those. They count the same as the card. Who writes them?" He opened the door. The warm Texas night air rolled in and mixed with the mall's cool interior for just a moment. "The Galleria has its own way of keeping people informed," he said. "Just don't correct the rules. That's the one thing I can tell you that'll matter more than anything else on that card." He left. I watched his S10 pull out of the lot, and then I was alone in a dead mall that was still breathing. The first hour was quiet in a way that felt designed. I did my first walkthrough at 10:15 p.m. North Wing first, as instructed. The North Wing had 12 storefronts, 6 on each side, and a restroom alcove at the far end. All the accent lights were on, casting their amber glow evenly. The storefronts were empty, or nearly empty. One had cardboard boxes stacked against the back wall. Another still had a glass display case, the kind you'd see in a watch shop, but the case was empty. The tile floor was clean, not spotless, not recently mopped, but clean in the way that suggested someone or something maintained a baseline. There was no dust accumulation on the ledges, no cobwebs in the ceiling corners. For an 11-year vacancy, the place looked like it had been closed for maybe a long weekend. I returned to the kiosk, wrote my first log entry, 10:15 p.m. in North Wing. No activity observed, and then headed to the South Wing. The South Wing was slightly longer, with 14 storefronts, and, at the far end, the escalator. It was a standard mall escalator, the kind with brushed metal sides and black rubber handrails. It sat motionless both flights, frozen mid-step. According to the laminated card, it had been mechanically disabled for years. Looking at it, I could believe that. The steps had a faint layer of grit on them, and the bottom landing plate had a small orange cone sitting on it, the kind a janitor would use. Nothing moved. Nothing sounded. I wrote my South Wing entry and returned to the kiosk. At 10:48 p.m., I opened the metal lockbox with a silver key. Inside were 3 things: a stack of old register receipts held together by a rubber band, a folded facilities inspection form dated March 2019, and a sealed white envelope with no name or address on it. The receipts were from stores that had once operated in the mall. Food court purchases mostly, soft pretzels, fountain drinks, a Chick-fil-A combo, all dated between 2009 and 2012, all paid in cash. Nothing unusual, except that every single receipt had a handwritten number in the top corner, small, neat, written in blue ink. The numbers were sequential, 001 through 014, 14 receipts, 14 numbers. I set them aside and opened the folded inspection form. It was a standard property management checklist: HVAC status, lighting, plumbing, pest evidence, structural notes. Most of the boxes were checked satisfactory, but at the bottom of the form, in the section labeled additional notes, someone had written a single sentence in handwriting that was different from the rest of the form. Tenant activity, reported in units 7, 12, and 19. No current leases on file. Marked for review. Tenant activity in a mall that had been closed for 6 years at the time of the inspection. I picked up the sealed envelope. It was light. I turned it over. On the back, stamped in faded red ink, were the words, "Lateral Reserve Group Bridgefield Property. Do not remove from monitoring station." I put it back in the lockbox. I wasn't sure why, but something about the envelope felt like it was waiting for a specific moment to be opened, and this wasn't it. At 11:34 p.m., the escalator started. I heard it from the kiosk, a low, grinding mechanical hum that built slowly, like an engine warming up. It came from the south wing, exactly where the escalator sat. I stood up out of instinct, then remembered the rule: do not approach the escalator while it is running. So I sat back down and listened. The hum was steady, rhythmic. It sounded healthy, which was the wrong word, but the only one that fit. Not like a broken machine shuddering back to life, like a machine that had been waiting to run and had finally been told it could. At 11:38 p.m., the phone rang. I counted. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. I picked it up. "Bridgefield Galleria, overnight monitoring," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. There was no voice on the other end, just ambient noise, the kind you hear when someone calls from a large indoor space. Echoing footsteps, a distant murmur that could have been conversation or could have been the music I was already hearing, played back at a different speed. And then, very clearly, a cash register chimed. Not a modern point-of-sale beep, an old mechanical register, the kind with a bell and a drawer that opens with a metallic clang. The sound repeated twice. Then the line went dead. I set the phone down. My hand was steady, but something behind my sternum was not. The escalator stopped at exactly 11:40 p.m., and in the silence that followed, I looked down at the logbook to write my entry, and saw that someone had already written in the margin beside my 10:15 p.m. note. The handwriting was small and precise, in ink that was slightly darker than mine. "Store 7 is expecting a delivery. You may be asked to sign." I stared at the margin note for a long time, not because the words themselves were especially alarming, but because of what they implied about the space I was sitting in. I had not left the kiosk since returning from my south wing walk. The logbook had been directly in front of me. The pen I'd brought, my own pen, as instructed, was still in my hand. No one had entered the building. No one had approached the desk. But the note was there, written in ink that had already dried, as if it had always been there, and I'd simply failed to notice it until now. I didn't touch it. I didn't cross it out. I remembered what Dale had said: don't correct the rules. And even though this wasn't technically a rule, it felt adjacent, like the building was testing whether I understood the principle before applying it to something that mattered more. I wrote my 11:40 p.m. log entry carefully. 11:34 p.m. escalator activated. South wing. Duration approximately 6 minutes. 11:38 p.m. Phone received. 3rd ring answered. No voice. Ambient noise and register sound. Line disconnected. Escalator stopped. 11:40 p.m. asterisk. I did not write about the margin note. Something told me the logbook already knew. The rest of that first night passed without major incident, though "without incident" is a phrase that means something different in Bridgefield Galleria than it does anywhere else. The music continued, shifting between songs I could almost name but never quite place. The accent lights stayed on, the temperature held steady. I completed my hourly walkthroughs, North Wing first, South Wing second, and logged each one. At 2:15 a.m., during my South Wing walk, I noticed that storefront number 7 had its overhead display light on. It had not been on during my previous walk at 1:10 a.m. I was certain of this because I'd been paying attention to the storefronts since reading the inspection form's note about tenant activity in units 7, 12, and 19. Store 7 was a mid-sized unit on the left side of the south wing. The signage above it was still in place, a backlit panel reading "Capstone Luggage and Leather Goods" in a serif font that looked like it hadn't been updated since the late 80s. Through the glass, I could see the interior was mostly empty. A few built-in shelving units along the back wall, a bare checkout counter, a doorway behind the counter leading to what I assumed was a stockroom. The display light, a single warm spotlight, recessed into the ceiling just inside the glass, was on. It illuminated a small section of the checkout counter, and on that counter, in the center of the lit area, sat a clipboard. It hadn't been there before. I was sure of that too, because on my 10:15 walk, I'd looked into every storefront with the attention of someone who was still deciding whether this job was real. Store 7 had been empty, counter bare, no clipboard. I remembered the margin note. Store 7 is expecting a delivery. You may be asked to sign. I also remembered Rule 3. If a storefront light is on, when it was previously off, note the store name and time in the logbook. Do not turn the light off yourself. The rules said nothing about entering the store. It said nothing about not entering the store. That ambiguity felt deliberate, like a door left unlocked by someone who wanted to see if you'd try the handle. I logged it. 2:15 a.m. Store 7, Capstone luggage. Display light on. Was off at 1:10 a.m. and kept walking. I didn't sign anything. When I returned to the kiosk at 2:30 a.m., there was a new note in the logbook margin. Same handwriting, same dark ink, written beside my earlier entry about the phone call. The register sound confirms a transaction was completed. This will be reflected in tomorrow's receipt inventory. The receipts in the lockbox, the ones numbered 001 through 014. I opened the lockbox again, counted the receipts. There were 15 now. The new one number 015 was on top of the stack. It was from Capstone Luggage and Leather Goods, dated today, time-stamped 11:38 p.m. The purchase was listed as 1X Transfer Folio Standard. The payment method was listed as account Bridgefield C. Bridgefield C. My last name is Duchesne. My first name is Cole C. I set the receipt back in the lockbox and closed it. My hands were still steady, but the rest of me wasn't. Something had purchased something from a closed store in a dead mall and charged it to an account with my initial, and the receipt had been generated. At the exact moment I'd answered the phone. I finished my shift at 6 a.m. I locked the main entrance, walked to my truck, and sat in a parking lot for 15 minutes without starting the engine. The sun was coming up over the flat Texas horizon, turning the sky a pale chemical orange. The Galleria looked exactly the way it had when I'd arrived, maintained, calm, closed. I drove home. I slept for 5 hours, and then I went back. I want to be clear about why. It wasn't courage. It wasn't curiosity. Not the kind that makes people in stories do foolish things for the sake of narrative momentum. It was the truck payment. It was the rent. It was $21.50 an hour, 5 nights a week, and the fact that nothing in that building had physically harmed me. The rules were strange. The receipts were impossible. The margin notes were unexplainable. But I was uninjured, employed, and 1 week away from making my first payment on time in 3 months. So I went back, and the second night is when the Galleria started to show me what it actually was. I arrived at 9:47 p.m. within the approved window. The parking lot was empty. No other vehicles. I unlocked the main entrance, stepped inside, and immediately noticed 2 changes. First, the music was different. Not a different song, different quality. The previous night's music had sounded piped through old ceiling speakers, tinny and distant. Tonight, it sounded closer, warmer, as if the speakers had been upgraded or the source had moved nearer to the main corridor. I could hear individual instruments now, a piano, a muted trumpet, strings. Second, the dry fountain in front of the kiosk had water in it, not running water, not flowing water, but the basin, which had been bone dry the night before, now contained roughly 3 inches of still, clear water. The surface was perfectly flat, undisturbed, reflecting the amber accent lights in a way that made it look like a dark mirror set into the floor. I remembered Rule 4. The fountain will not run. If you hear water, leave the main corridor and wait in the east anchor vestibule until the sound stops. The fountain was not running. There was no sound of water. It was simply there, present, still, and unexplained. I sat at the kiosk and opened the logbook. My entries from the previous night were all intact, but beneath them, in the margin at the bottom of the page, a new note had appeared. This one was longer than the others, written in the same small, precise hand. Shift 2 Protocol Addendum, effective immediately. A. If you hear footsteps in the north wing between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., do not alter your walking route. Complete your scheduled walk as normal. The footsteps will adjust to yours. This is preferable to the alternative. B. Store 12 may show display activity tonight. Unlike Store 7, do not log Store 12's light status. Acknowledge it verbally. Say the store number and the word noted, nothing more. C. The water in the fountain basin is a record of shift attendance. Each monitor who completes a full shift adds to the level. Do not touch the water. Do not measure the water. Do not reference the water level in your log entries. 3 new rules. Not on the laminated card. Not printed. Handwritten into the margins of my own logbook sometime between 6:15 a.m. when I'd left and 9:47 p.m. when I'd returned, in a locked building that no one else should have entered, or written by the building itself. That thought arrived calmly, as a fact rather than a fear, and that calmness disturbed me more than the thought did. I began my 10:15 p.m. walkthrough, North Wing first. The 12 storefronts were as they'd been, dark, empty, amber-lit, but I found myself listening differently now, aware that between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. footsteps might join mine. The wing felt longer tonight, though I knew its dimensions hadn't changed. It was the attention that stretched it. When you're listening for something that hasn't started yet, every hallway becomes a throat. South Wing next. Store 7's display light was off. The clipboard was gone. Store 12, which I now identified as a former women's clothing boutique called Mary and Claire, was dark. Store 19, the third unit mentioned on the 2019 inspection form, was at the far end of the south wing, close to the escalator. It had been a card and gift shop called Paper Trail. Its storefront glass was intact, but had been covered from the inside with brown craft paper, blocking any view of the interior. I hadn't noticed the paper covering the night before. It was possible I'd simply missed it in the darkness of the south wing's far end. It was also possible it hadn't been there. I returned to the kiosk and made my entries. At 10:50 p.m., I opened the lockbox to check the receipt stack. Still 15 receipts. No new additions, but the sealed white envelope, the one stamped with Lateral Reserve Group, do not remove from monitoring station, had changed. The seal, which had been intact the night before, was now broken. The flap was open, though the envelope was still face down in the box. I picked it up and looked inside. It contained a single sheet of folded paper. I unfolded it. It was a form, not a standard business form, but something that looked custom printed, with a Lateral Reserve Group header and a Galveston P.O. box at the top. The form was titled Bridgefield Galleria Occupancy Disclosure Statement. Below the title were 2 columns. The left column was labeled Unit Number, and the right column was labeled Current Status. 23 units were listed, corresponding to the storefronts in both wings. Most had the status Vacant Standard, but 3 entries were different. Unit 7, Capstone Luggage and Leather Goods Active, Conditional. Unit 12, Mary and Claire Active, Pending Review. Unit 19, Paper Trail Active, Sealed. At the bottom of the form, below the unit list, was a signature line. Beside it, in pre-printed text, it read, Overnight Facilities Monitor, Acknowledged and Witnessed. The line was blank. No previous monitor had signed it, or if they had, the form had been replaced with a fresh one. I did not sign it. I folded the paper and put it back in the envelope. Then I returned the envelope to the lockbox and closed it. My pen was in my hand. I could feel the specific weight of it between my fingers, and I was suddenly very aware of the fact that Mrs. Rivette had told me to bring my own pen, not a borrowed one, mine, as if the act of writing in this place required a specific chain of ownership, as if signatures here meant something that went beyond paperwork. At 11:32 p.m., the escalator started again. Same low hum, same mechanical patience. I sat at the kiosk and waited. At 11:36 p.m., the phone rang. I counted to 3 and picked up. This time there was a voice. It was female, middle-aged, and perfectly pleasant in the way that retail voices are trained to be. Not warm, not cold, calibrated. "Good evening, Bridgefield Galleria. Store 12 is confirming adjusted hours for the upcoming week. May I note the monitor on shift?" I didn't speak. I held the receiver and let the silence stretch. "May I note the monitor on shift?" the voice repeated. Same tone, same cadence, as if the sentence had been reset rather than repeated. "Cole," I said. I don't know why I answered either. It came up before the decision was made, like a reflex trained by years of answering phones at work sites and dispatch offices. "Thank you, Cole. Store 12's adjusted hours are noted. A revised schedule will be available in your logbook by your next walkthrough. Please acknowledge Store 12 verbally on your next South Wing pass." The line went dead. The escalator stopped at 11:40. The 6-minute window, same as the night before. I looked at the logbook. Beneath the Shift 2 addendum, in the same margin, a new line had appeared. Store 12. Marion Clare hours adjusted per monitor confirmation, Schedule 1, a.m. to 4 a.m., conditional on monitor acknowledgement. I had confirmed my name, and in doing so, I had apparently authorized something. A store that had been closed for 11 years now had operating hours in the middle of the night, conditional on me. At 1 a.m., I began my North Wing walk. The corridor was the same as before, amber-lit, clean, quiet. I was halfway down the wing when I heard them, footsteps, behind me, matching my pace, not following, matching. When I slowed, they slowed. When I paused to look at a storefront, they paused at what sounded like the same distance. They didn't echo the way footsteps echo in an empty building. They sounded padded, like dress shoes on carpet, even though the entire corridor was tile. I remembered the addendum. The footsteps will adjust to yours. This is preferable to the alternative. I didn't turn around. I completed the North Wing walk, logged it, and headed to the South Wing. The footsteps didn't follow me past the main corridor junction. They stopped at exactly the point where the North Wing ended and the central hall began, as if whatever was walking had a boundary it respected, or a lease it operated within. In the South Wing, I approached Store 12, Marion Clare. The storefront was still dark, but as I stood in front of the glass, I could see something I hadn't noticed before. Inside, near the back wall, there was a faint light, not the display spotlight, something deeper in the store, as if a lamp were on in a back office. It was warm, almost golden, and it flickered slightly, like a bulb on a dimmer that someone was adjusting by hand. I followed the addendum. "Store 12, I said aloud. Noted. The light behind the glass steadied, stopped flickering, held still at a constant warm glow, as if my acknowledgement had completed some kind of circuit. Then I heard it faintly, from inside Marion Clare, behind the glass and the darkness and the 11 years of closure, the sound of hangers sliding along a metal rack, one after another, slow, deliberate, browsing, as if someone inside was shopping. I walked away. At 3:15 a.m., I returned to the kiosk and found the black notebook had moved. It had been sitting to the left of the logbook since my first night. Now it was centered on the desk, positioned directly in front of my chair, with the silver triangle facing up. The cover was slightly open, not flat but tinted, as if it had been recently closed and the pages hadn't settled yet. Rule 8 on the laminated card. The black notebook is not part of your assigned equipment. Do not open it during your first shift. This was my second shift. I opened it. The first page was blank. The second page had a single line written in blue ink, in a handwriting style I didn't recognize, rounder than the margin notes, more personal. If you're reading this, you've made it past night 1. That's further than 2 of us got. The notebook will tell you what the laminated card can't. Don't read ahead. The pages know where you are. I turned to the third page. It was blank. So was the fourth and the fifth, and every page after that completely empty, clean, as if the notebook contained exactly one message and was waiting to produce the next. I closed it and set it back to the left of the logbook. At 4 a.m., I checked the lockbox again. The receipt stack now had 16 entries. The new receipt, number 016, was from Marion Clare, dated tonight, timestamped 1:47 a.m. The purchase was listed as 1X garment, archive cut, payment method, account Bridgefield, C. There it was again, my initial, my account. A store had opened inside a dead mall on a schedule I had apparently authorized, and someone or something had made a purchase on a tab tied to my name for an item described in language that sounded less like retail and more like record-keeping. Archive cut. I looked at the fountain. The water was still there, flat and dark and reflective. I thought about Addendum C. The water in the fountain basin is a record of shift attendance. 3 inches. If each completed shift added to the level, and Dale had been working here before me, that water represented dozens of nights, maybe hundreds. A ledger measured in inches. At 5:50 a.m., I began closing procedures. Walkthrough of both wings. Final log entry. Lockbox secured. Everything in order. Everything quiet. The music had shifted to something slower, almost like a lullaby. And the accent lights had dimmed by perhaps 10%, as if the building were preparing to rest. I locked the main entrance and walked to my truck. The sun was beginning to lighten the eastern sky. The Galleria sat behind me, calm and maintained and impossible. On my dashboard, tucked under my windshield wiper, was a small square of paper. I pulled it free. It was a comment card, the kind you'd find at a customer service desk. Across the top in printed text it read, "Bridgefield Galleria. We value your experience below." That were 3 checkbox options. My visit met expectations. My visit did not meet expectations. I would like to schedule a return visit. At the bottom, in the same small, precise handwriting, from the logbook margins, someone had written, "Your account has been noted. Store 19 will be available for review, beginning night 4. Please ensure your pen is present." I drove home. I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table and held the comment card and tried to understand what kind of building maintains a customer feedback system for an employee who is the only person inside it. Or what kind of closed mall generates receipts, adjusts store hours, assigns accounts, and leaves notes on the vehicles of its night monitor. And I thought about Store 19, paper trail, the one with the craft paper covering the glass, active status, sealed, available beginning night 4. I was on night 2. That meant 2 more shifts before whatever was behind that brown paper became part of my routine. I put the comment card in my kitchen drawer, face down. At 3 p.m., when I opened the drawer to get a fork, the card had flipped itself over. The third checkbox, I would like to schedule a return visit, was now checked, in ink that matched my own pen. Night 3 was when the Galleria stopped pretending it was showing me everything gradually and began to make clear that it had been showing me only what it wanted, in the order it had chosen, at a pace designed to make each revelation feel like my idea. I arrived at 9:46 p.m. The parking lot was empty, as always, but the main entrance lights, the large overhead fixtures mounted above the glass doors, were on for the first time. They hadn't been illuminated on nights 1 or 2. Now they glowed with a steady, warm, commercial brightness, the kind designed to welcome foot traffic from a parking lot that hadn't seen a customer in over a decade. The effect was precise. From 20 yards away, the Galleria looked open, not abandoned and maintained, not closed, but lit, open, ready, staffed. I unlocked the doors and stepped inside. The music was already playing, and tonight I recognized the song, a slow, string-heavy arrangement of Fly Me to the Moon. It sounded crisp, almost high fidelity, as if the speaker system had been serviced between my shifts. The accent lights were at full brightness. The fountain basin held what I estimated was 3.5 inches of water now, the additional half-inch confirming that my completed shift, though the night before, had been recorded in the only ledger the building seemed to trust. I sat at the kiosk and opened the logbook. My previous entries were intact, but a new addendum had been written into the margin at the top of tonight's page, above where my first entry would go. Shift 3 Protocol Addendum, effective immediately. A. Store 7 will be closed for restocking tonight. Do not log any activity from Store 7, regardless of what you observe. If Store 7's display light activates, it is part of the restocking process and is not subject to monitoring protocol. B. The footsteps in the north wing will be present for the full duration of tonight's shift, not only between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. They have been extended to match your patrol schedule. Continue walking as normal. C. Beginning tonight, the logbook will contain entries you did not write. These entries are accurate and should not be disputed, crossed out, or questioned in subsequent entries. They are the Galleria's own record and exist alongside yours. D. Do not correct the rules. There it was, not buried in Dale's parting advice or implied by the margin notes, written directly as the fourth point of a protocol addendum by whatever authored these instructions. The phrase felt different, seeing it in the building's own handwriting. It wasn't guidance anymore. It was a condition. I did my 10:15 walkthrough. North wing, the footsteps were there immediately, matching my pace from the moment I entered the corridor. They sounded different tonight. Still padded, still behind me, but now accompanied by a faint secondary sound, the rustle of a shopping bag, plastic from the cadence of it, swinging lightly with each step, the way a bag swings when someone is carrying a purchase and walking contentedly through a mall. Whatever was behind me had bought something, or was performing the memory of having bought something. I wasn't sure which possibility was worse. South wing. Store 7's display light was on, but per tonight's addendum, I didn't log it. I did notice through the glass that the clipboard was back on the checkout counter. Next to it sat a small cardboard box, the kind used for shipping. It hadn't been there before. The restocking apparently was underway. Store 12, Mary and Claire, had its faint interior light on again. Steady this time, no flickering. I stopped in front of the glass. Store 12 noted. The sound of hangers sliding along a rack began almost immediately, but tonight there was a second sound underneath it, the quiet, papery whisper of a garment being removed from a hanger and unfolded. Someone was making a selection. I moved on to Store 19, Paper Trail. The craft paper still covered the glass, but tonight there was something new on the outside of the storefront. Affixed to the glass at eye level, secured with a single strip of clear tape, was a small, printed card, same format as the laminated protocol card in the logbook, same clean black type. Store 19, Paper Trail status, sealed access, Night 4, authorized monitor only. Contents, see notebook, see notebook. The black notebook with a silver triangle, the one that had shown me a single message on Night 2, and then nothing but blank pages. I returned to the kiosk, opened the notebook. Page 1, still blank. Page 2, the original message. If you're reading this, you've made it past Night 1. Page 3, no longer blank. New text, same rounded blue handwriting. Store 19 is the reason the monitoring position exists. Everything else, the receipts, the stores, the escalator, the phone, is the Galleria maintaining itself, running its own systems, keeping the lights on because that's what a mall does. But Store 19 is different. Store 19 is where the Galleria keeps its records, not sales records, not lease agreements, personnel records. Every person who has ever worked in this building, every clerk, every janitor, every store manager, every overnight monitor has a file inside Store 19. The craft paper went up when the last daytime worker realized what the files contained. She covered the glass so the files couldn't be seen from the corridor. It didn't help. The files don't need to be seen. They just need to be signed. I turned to page 4, blank. Whatever the notebook was telling me, it was telling me one night at a time. I closed it and sat in the amber quiet of the main corridor and listened to the muzak play a song I almost recognized and thought about what it meant that a mall could have personnel records for people who hadn't worked in it for over a decade, that a building could maintain files the way a human resources department maintains files, updating them, organizing them, waiting for signatures. At 11:33 p.m., the escalator started. At 11:37, the phone rang. I answered on the third ring. The voice was different tonight. Male, older, with the flat affect of someone reading from a script that had been read thousands of times. Good evening, Bridgefield Galleria. This is a courtesy call regarding your account status. Your current balance reflects 3 completed transactions across 2 active stores. A 4th transaction is pending authorization and will require an in-person signature at the designated unit. Do you have any questions regarding your account? I said nothing. Do you have any questions regarding your account? The voice repeated. Same cadence, same words. Reset, not repeated. Which unit? I asked. Store 19. Paper trail. Authorization window opens at the beginning of your next scheduled shift. Thank you for choosing Bridgefield Galleria. The line went dead. The escalator stopped at 11:40. I looked at the logbook. Beneath my entries in handwriting that was not mine, a new log entry had appeared. 11:37 p.m. phone call received. Monitor confirmed account inquiry. Store 19 authorization verbally requested by monitor. Noted. I had not requested authorization. I had asked a clarifying question, but the Galleria had interpreted my question as a request, and its own log, the one the addendum said I was not to dispute, now recorded it as such. The building wasn't just keeping records. It was editing interactions into the version it needed them to be. The rest of night 3 passed in a state of controlled unease. The footsteps accompanied every walkthrough. The muzak played without interruption. At 2:40 a.m., I found a new receipt in the lockbox, number 017, from a store I hadn't seen to activate. Kessler Opticians, Unit 4. The purchase was listed as 1X lens fitting, standard review, payment method, account Bridgefield, C. A store I had never acknowledged, never walked past during an active moment, had generated a transaction on my account. At 4:15 a.m., I noticed the fountain. The water level had risen, not by the small increment I'd observed between shifts by nearly a full inch. The surface was still flat and undisturbed, but the basin was now visibly fuller, as if multiple shifts had been completed in the span of one night, or as if the building was counting something other than my attendance. I finished my shift, locked the doors, drove home. The comment card in my kitchen drawer had changed, the handwritten note at the bottom. Your account has been noted. Store 19 will be available for review beginning night 4, had been replaced with new text, authorization confirmed. Your file is ready for review. Night 4. I almost didn't go back. I sat in my truck in the parking lot of my apartment complex for 40 minutes, engine running, doing the math. I had been paid for 3 shifts. The money was real. It had appeared in my checking account via direct deposit from LRG Property Services, which I assumed was lateral reserve group. The amount was correct. The tax withholding was standard. Whatever else the Galleria was, it paid on time. But paying on time doesn't mean the job is safe. It means the job wants you to stay. I went back because of the truck payment. I went back because the money was the only thing standing between me and a spiral I couldn't recover from. And I went back because some part of me, the part that had answered the phone and given my name without thinking, the part that had said which unit, instead of hanging up that part, needed to see what was inside store 19. I arrived at 9:48 p.m. The entrance lights were on again. The music was playing before I opened the doors. Inside, the corridor was brighter than any previous night, not just the accent lights, but several of the overhead fluorescents in the main hall had activated, casting the kind of even commercial white light you'd see in a functioning mall during business hours. The fountain water had risen another half-inch. I sat at the kiosk, opened the logbook. Tonight's addendum was brief. Shift 4 protocol addendum. A. Store 19 is now accessible. Use the black key. Return the key to the ring before your shift ends. B. Inside store 19 you will find a filing system. Your file is in the front. Review it. Do not remove it from the store. C. When you are finished reviewing, close the file. Place it back in its original position and exit the store. Say nothing as you leave. D. The notebook has additional context. Read it before entering store 19. I opened the black notebook. Page 4 had text now. The files in store 19 are not about employment. They're about occupancy. The Galleria considers every worker a tenant, not staff tenant. When you accepted the monitoring position, you entered into a lease, not for a unit, for a presence. Your file tracks the terms of that lease when you arrived, what you've authorized, what transactions have occurred on your account, and how many shifts remain before your occupancy becomes permanent. Dale's file is in there. Mine is in there. The woman who covered the glass is in there. We're all tenants. The only question is whether the lease is still conditional or whether it's been converted. If your file has a red tab on it, the conversion has started. If it has a black tab, it's complete. If it has no tab at all, you still have time. But not much. The Galleria doesn't like vacancies. The handwriting on this page was slightly different from the previous entry, shakier. The letters were formed with the same roundness, but the lines wavered, as if the person writing had been doing so quickly, or in the dark, or afraid. I put the notebook down. I took the black key from the ring, and at 11 p.m. I walked to the south wing. The craft paper was still on the glass of store 19, but the door, a standard glass retail door to the right of the display window, was unlocked. I didn't need the key for the door. It swung open when I pushed it, releasing a breath of air that was cooler than the corridor, cooler than the mall's already precise climate, and carrying a smell I recognized instantly. Paper, old paper, the kind that's been sitting in a sealed room for decades. The same smell that hits me every night at 11:40 when the escalator hum starts in my chest. The interior of Paper Trail was not what I expected. The store had been a card and gift shop, so I'd imagined empty display racks and bare shelves. Instead, the space had been converted. The display fixtures were gone. In their place were filing cabinets, not the institutional metal kind, but wooden ones, dark oak, with brass handles and small label plates on each drawer. They lined every wall, floor to ceiling, and a double row ran down the center of the store like library stacks. The warm golden light I'd seen from the corridor came from a single desk lamp on a small table near the entrance, next to which sat a wooden chair and a pen. Not my pen, a different one, black barrel, silver clip. The clip had a small triangle engraved on it. The filing cabinets were labeled. Each drawer had a nameplate with a range of dates, 1987 to 1990, 1991 to 1994, 1995 to 1998, and so on, up through the most recent drawer, which read 2022 to present. The system was chronological, organizing the building's tenants by the period of their occupancy. My file was in the front, as the addendum had said. It sat in a vertical file holder on the small table next to the lamp, a manila folder slightly thicker than I expected for someone who'd been there 4 nights. A white label on the tab read, Duchenne, coal monitor, overnight occupancy initiated. No colored tab, not red, not black, no tab at all. According to the notebook, that meant I still had time. I opened the file. The first page was a standard-looking intake form, but the details were unsettling in their completeness. My full name, date of birth, social security number, home address, the make and model of my truck, my previous employer, the date of my layoff, the remaining balance on my truck loan information I had never provided to Mrs. Rivette or anyone associated with the Galleria. Information the building had sourced on its own. The second page was a transaction ledger. Every receipt that had appeared in the lockbox under my account was listed here. The transfer folio from Capstone Luggage, the garment from Marion Clare, the lens fitting from Kessler Opticians, and 3 others I hadn't seen receipts for yet, from stores I hadn't been aware were active. Each transaction included a timestamp, a unit number, and a column labeled occupancy weight. The values in that column were small, decimal numbers, 0.03, 0.05, 0.02, and they were totaled at the bottom, 0.22. The third page was a lease summary. At the top, lease type conditional, conversion threshold, 1.00, current occupancy weight, 0.22. Every transaction on my account moved me closer to a threshold, and once that threshold was reached, the lease would convert from conditional to permanent. I would stop being a monitor and become a tenant, whatever that meant, in a building where tenants didn't leave, and their files sat in oak cabinets, organized by decades. The fourth page stopped me. It was a list of previous overnight monitors, 7 names, each with a start date, an end date, and a final status. 5 of the 7 had the status converted permanent occupancy. 1 had the status transferred C Lateral Reserve Group Galveston, and one, the most recent before me, had the status departed file open. That was Dale. Departed, file open, not closed, not complete, just open, the way a door is open when someone has walked through it but hasn't yet decided whether to come back. Below the list, in handwriting I now recognized as the notebook's author, was a single note. The pen on the table is for signing the lease. Don't. But know that every shift you complete without signing adds to your occupancy weight anyway. The Galleria doesn't need your signature. It needs your hours. The signature just makes it faster. I closed the file, put it back in the holder. I looked at the pen with the silver triangle clip, and I understood, with a clarity that felt like cold water, what this building was. Not haunted, not cursed, operational. The Galleria was a commercial system that had never stopped running. It had lost its stores, its customers, its daylight hours, its public function, but it had not lost its purpose. It existed to house tenants and process transactions, and when the human tenants left, it started converting its workers instead. Every shift was a transaction. Every log entry was a receipt. Every rule I followed was a clause in a lease I hadn't signed but was honoring through compliance. I left store 19. I said nothing as I exited, per the addendum. The black key, I now realized, wasn't for the store's door. It was for the filing cabinets. The building had given me access to the records themselves, the option to open any drawer, to see any file, to review the full history of its tenancy. It was a privilege extended to someone the Galleria already considered one of its own. I locked the key back on the ring. At 11:40 p.m., the escalators started and stopped in its usual 6-minute window. But tonight, when it stopped, the music stopped too. The corridor went silent for the first time since I'd started working there. No music, no ambient hum, just the sound of the building existing, the subtle clicks of climate control, the almost inaudible buzz of fluorescent ballasts, and somewhere deep in the north wing, the footsteps, still walking, still carrying their shopping bag, completing a route through a mall that existed for them alone. I finished my shift in silence. I logged everything. I checked the lockbox, 3 new receipts, bringing my account to 20 transactions. I did not calculate the occupancy weight they represented. I didn't want to know how close the number had moved. At 6 a.m., I locked the entrance and drove home. I did not go back for night 5, or night 6, or any night after that. Mrs. Rivette called. Once, 3 days after I stopped showing up. She didn't ask why I'd left. She said only, "Your file remains open. Your account will continue to accrue. If you wish to discuss your lease status, the monitoring station is available." I hung up. That was 14 months ago. I moved out of Beaumont. I'm back in Houma now, staying with my brother, working a day shift at a pipe fitting company that pays less than the Galleria, but doesn't have a filing cabinet with my name in it. Except I'm not sure about that anymore. The escalator sound in my chest started 3 weeks after I left. Every night, 11:40 p.m., 6 minutes. The smell comes with it. And 2 months ago, I found something in my mailbox that made me understand Dale's file status in a way I hadn't before. It was a receipt, number 034, from Paper Trail Store 19, time-stamped at 2:15 a.m., on a night I was asleep in Houma, 200 miles from Bridgefield. The purchase was listed as 1X file maintenance, ongoing, payment method, account Bridgefield, C. My account is still active. Transactions are still posting. My occupancy weight is still climbing toward a threshold I can't see. In a building I no longer enter, on a lease I never signed. The black notebook is in my closet. I took it on night 4, which I shouldn't have done. For the first 11 months, it was silent, just the pages I'd already read, and blanks after that. But last week, page 5 had writing on it. New, fresh ink, the rounded blue handwriting, steadier now, as if the person writing was no longer in a hurry. The Galleria appreciates your continued tenancy. Your file has been updated to reflect your current address. A welcome packet will be forwarded to your new location. Store 19 is always open for tenants in good standing. I haven't received the packet yet, but every night at 11:40, the escalator hums inside me, and the smell of old paper fills a room that has no paper in it, and I sit very still and try not to think about what it means that a building I left 14 months ago still considers me present. Because the worst part isn't that the Galleria followed me home. The worst part is that, according to its records, I never left. My shifts are still logging. My account is still active. My transactions are still posting. And somewhere in a dead mall in a small Texas town, in a store called Paper Trail, in a wooden cabinet with brass handles, my file is getting thicker. I don't know what happens when it reaches 1.00. But the fountain knows, and the water is still rising.